Hello and welcome to Focus on Africa, coming to you from BBC World News. Now, NGOs have condemned the excessive use of force and firearms against peaceful demonstrations in Angola after the police used tear gas and anti-government protesters. Now, violent clashes started at the end of last year. That's according to Amnesty International. And at least 10 people have reportedly been killed in the last few days as those protesters carry on demonstrating against poor living conditions. Marina Darras has more.
45 years is too much. The protesters' rallying cry could still be heard yesterday in the streets of Luanda, days after a series of deadly anti-government protests. A slogan aimed at criticizing the ruling party, the MPLA, which has ruled over the country since Angola gained independence from Portugal in 1974. February the 4th is known as Liberation Day, a symbolic date for Angolans, marking the start of the armed uprising against Portuguese colonial rule. Around 100 demonstrators were dispersed by security forces on horseback, using batons and firing tear gas, arresting dozens of people in the capital.
A few moments ago, they fired tear gas and rubber bullets at us. We will never forget this. We will fight.
On Saturday, the Angolan forces responded to a group of separatists marching in the remote diamond mining town of Cafunfo, using live ammunition and tear gas on the crowd. Anti-government protests have gained momentum over the second half of 2020 as poor living conditions, alleged state corruption and delayed local election pushed people to take to the streets. The government has vowed to open an investigation into the Cafunfo incident, but the anger won't be dialed down so easily.
We don't see anything. The only job we have is the lottery. So, 45 years of government, we don't want the MPLA anymore. And if the MPLA keeps on killing, we prefer to die, because our ancestors also took up arms to free this country.
For many in Angola, security forces have a reputation for being quick to use violence. It's a country that still bears the scars of a bloody civil war and decades of repression and alleged corruption. And with the general election scheduled in 2022, feelings of disenchantment and anger towards the government, which has yet to turn around the economy, are only mounting. Marina Darras, BBC News.
So let's just remind you of the backdrop in which this is all taking place. Now, despite its tumultuous political history, Angola was once described as one of the fastest growing economies and is one of the top 10 wealthiest countries in Africa. Now, as the second biggest producer of oil on the continent, behind Nigeria, Angola is a member of OPEC. The sector accounts for a third of its GDP and does unfortunately suffer from the effects of this pandemic. Now, the country is also rich in diamonds, phosphate and iron. Chinese money has been and continues to be its principal source of investment. Out of all the countries in Africa, Angola has the largest debt towards China. In fact, the country received 30% of the total amount of China's investment to the continent this century. Despite its wealth in natural resources, this is a country of extremes. You get very rich people, you've got a very large youth population, but most of that population is living in poverty. Well, I'm joined now by Edmilson Angelo, a researcher at the Royal Holloway University of London and also an expert on Angolan politics. Thank you so much for joining us here on Focus on Africa. First off, what strikes you the most about these protests that you're watching?
So basically, one of what is really interesting about the protests is the fact that this is now starting to happen continuously. And I think it's happened because of the way in which the current president, positioned himself when he came into power in 2017. He positioned himself as an insider who is willing to go against the status quo. And that literally rolled people's expectations towards a new Angola, because it was actually doing a lot of good things in the first year. So after 4 years of the governance, I think things have not really been the way he has said that things would be in the beginning. And I think the fact that the youth who account for the majority of the population today, don't really have reflections of the civil war. But the idea or the reference is the prosperity due to the oil boom, together with the promise that were made, which was not conquered. And I think much of what we are seeing really comes from that. And what we watched in Kafunfu was just a reflection of things that happened throughout the whole country, not just in the province of Lunda North.
The youth, like you said, there is a large young population in the country. Like many protests and movements we've seen around the world, really spearheading what's taking place. How is the government, does the government know how to handle them? How strong is their voice?
Right now, one of the biggest challenges from the government is how to deal with the instrument in which the youth is using to pretty much try to fight against the government, which is social media. It's really interesting to see how social media has become such a massive instrument for us to analyze state-citizen relationship in Angola right now. The government continues to try and use what they used to it, which is an approach that is very aggressive without listening to the other side. But the reality of the matter is that the way in which the government is willing to deal with situations like that is no longer acceptable, because now we have videos and photos that pretty much show the facts of it. So it's interesting to see how the government is finding it very hard to deal with this reality now.
Edmilson, you've been researching the country's history. How long do you think they are likely to allow this situation to continue? The protests on the streets.
That's a very good question, because this space in which people have now started to make use of it in terms of space to protest also comes as a result of what President Lourenço did when he came into power. He started to urge for a more open country. So people started to get a hand of freedom. And now that people got a little bit of it, and the government is trying to close this space, it's impossible, because there's just so many resources that people can now utilize to try and express their voices. So I think the position of the government, and we saw right now with what happened in Kafunfu, where the government began with a very strong and arrogant position, but now is going towards a more sensible approach in which they are saying that they're actually going to open an inquiry to find out what's going to happen, what has really happened over
Well, do you know what, Edmilson, let's just pick up on that. There is this call for this inquiry. The government initially said no, and like you said, they will do it now. What's the likelihood that there will be a level of accountability by those found responsible? Because there are numbers of people who have disappeared.
Right. Exactly. And I think that also comes down to the moment that we're living right now, the pressure in which the government is now facing because of everything that has happened, not just now, but throughout the whole COVID period. There has been a lot of protests and a lot of situations like that. So I really strongly believe that there has to be a decision from the government to try and take a very independent approach when it comes to these investigations, because if the outcome of these investigations do not reflect the facts that we are seeing on the videos and the image, I'm 100% sure that people are going to go out to protest even more, and perhaps we might see more deaths, and that's not what we want for our country.
OK, well, you're watching the situation, as are we. Thank you very much for your time today on Focus on Africa. That's Edmilson Angelo. Thank you.